It took 14 minutes for a billionaire CEO to lose everything: his reputation, his investors, his empire, all because he couldn't resist mocking a scarred biker's appearance and throwing coffee in his face like some kind of feudal king. What Danny didn't know was that the silent man wiping espresso from his eyes had a phone number that could summon more power than all his money combined, and mercy was the only thing keeping him from experiencing what happens when 400 veterans decide you've disrespected the wrong brother. Before we dive in, quick question: where are you watching this from right now? Is it early morning with coffee in your hand, or late at night when you should already be asleep? Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far the story reaches, because what happened in that San Francisco penthouse proves that money can't buy you dignity, and disrespect has a price tag even billionaires can't afford. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. Now let's get into the story. The Valentina didn't just serve breakfast. It served status. Perched on the 42nd floor of San Francisco's most exclusive tower, the restaurant existed in that rarefied air where money stopped being currency and became atmosphere. Marble imported from Carrara. Chandeliers that cost more than suburban houses. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering views that made mortals feel like gods. And at the corner table, bathed in golden morning light, sat a man who'd convinced himself he was one. Danny P. Johnson, CEO of Primavest Capital. Net worth, $4.7 billion. Give or take a yacht. His suit was custom Seville Row, the kind of red that screamed confidence without saying a word. His watch could have funded a small school. Everything about him, from his platinum cufflinks to his perfectly styled salt and pepper hair, whispered the same message: I own this room. I own this city. I own you. 3 investors sat across from him, suits slightly less expensive, smiles slightly more desperate. They laughed when Danny laughed. Nodded when Danny spoke. The hierarchy was clear. 400, Danny said, swirling his espresso like fine wine. That's how many workers we cut last quarter. He paused for effect, watching their faces. Increased shareholder value by 18%. One investor, younger, still naive enough to have a conscience, hesitated. 400 families. 400 salaries, Danny corrected, his smile sharp as broken glass. There's a difference. One costs money. The other makes it. He leaned back, the leather chair sighing beneath him. You want to be wealthy, Marcus? Stop thinking about people. Start thinking about percentages. The table went quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet. Respectful quiet. The kind of silence that happens when someone says something cruel and everyone pretends it's wisdom. A waiter approached, young, maybe 22, hands trembling slightly as he refilled water glasses. Danny didn't look at him. Didn't acknowledge his existence beyond a dismissive wave when the pitcher hovered too long. Careful, Danny murmured, eyes still on his investors. Spill on this suit and you'll be paying it off until you're 50. The waiter's face flushed. He retreated, head down, shoulders tight. Danny watched him go with the faint satisfaction of a man who enjoyed watching others shrink. This was his world. Controlled. Pristine. A place where everyone knew their value, and most people's value was significantly less than his. Then the elevator doors opened. The sound was subtle, a soft ding that barely registered over the classical music piping through hidden speakers. But something changed. The air itself shifted, like a record skipping. 4 men stepped out. They didn't belong. Leather vests worn soft from years of road and weather. Boots that had walked through places the marble had never touched. The faint smell of motor oil and asphalt, mixing with the restaurant's carefully curated scent of expensive coffee and fresh pastries. Fredo led them, mid-40s, beard streaked with gray, eyes that had seen things Danny's money couldn't buy or erase. Behind him, Johnny Sins, lean and watchful, Luke broad-shouldered with tattoos crawling up his neck, and Meacham quiet, the kind of quiet that made smart people nervous. They weren't loud. Weren't aggressive. They walked with the calm purpose of men who'd earned their right to be wherever they chose to stand. But in the Valentina, their presence felt like a crack in expensive porcelain. Conversations stuttered. Silverware paused mid-air. A woman in pearls glanced over, her expression caught between curiosity and distaste. The hostess, perfectly trained, perfectly polished, approached with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, gentlemen. Do you have a reservation?" "Yeah," Fredo said, voice low and easy. "Meeting a friend. Kitchen staff. Tommy Reardon." Recognition flickered across her face. Tommy was a veteran, worked prep, kept to himself. Good guy. But the hostess glanced toward Danny's table, then back at the bikers, calculating social mathematics in real time. "Of course. Right this way." As Fredo passed Danny's table, he nodded, a simple gesture of acknowledgement, the kind of courtesy one human being offers another in passing. Danny's lip curled. He didn't return the nod. Instead, he turned to his investors, voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "Interesting," he said, the word dripping with contempt. "The Valentina's standards must be slipping. I thought they had a dress code." Fredo kept walking. Didn't react. Didn't flinch. That calm refusal to engage only irritated Danny more, like an itch he couldn't scratch. The bikers settled at a table near the kitchen entrance, far from the windows, far from the view, far from the section where people like Danny sat. They ordered coffee. Black. Simple. Nothing on the menu that required 3 different French words to pronounce. Danny watched them, his breakfast suddenly less interesting than the disruption in his carefully ordered universe. His fingers drummed against the white tablecloth, a rhythm of barely contained annoyance. Marcus cleared his throat. "Should we?" "No." Danny's eyes never left the bikers. "Let them have their coffee." His smile was thin, calculating. Some people need to be reminded where they stand in the food chain. The investors shifted uncomfortably. Even they could sense the tension building, thick as the fog outside the windows. Fredo sat with his back to Danny, talking quietly with his brothers. Whatever they were discussing, it didn't involve the billionaire 20 feet away. And that indifference, that complete lack of concern for Danny's opinion, was the most insulting thing of all. Danny leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, watching the bikers like a predator studying prey that didn't know it was being hunted. His voice came out smooth, almost conversational, but everyone at his table heard the edge beneath it. "They don't belong here." The words hung in the expensive air, heavy with promise and threat, waiting for something to break. The waiter's name was Miguel. 23. Third-generation immigrant. Working 2 jobs to put his sister through community college. Right now, he wished he'd called in sick. He approached Fredo's table with a pot of fresh coffee, trying to ignore the weight of Danny's stare boring into his back. The bikers looked up, offering easy smiles, the kind that actually reached their eyes. "Coffee, gentlemen." Miguel's voice was steadier than his hands. "Appreciate it," Fredo said, sliding his cup forward. Simple. Civil. Human. But when Miguel turned to head back toward the kitchen, Danny's voice cut across the room like a knife through silk. "Hey. You. Miguel froze." "Yeah, you with the coffee pot." Danny gestured lazily. "While you're being so generous with the service, why don't you ask your friends if they need directions back to whatever garage they crawled out of?" Nervous laughter rippled from a nearby table. Miguel's face went hot. He opened his mouth, closed it, trapped between customer service training and basic human dignity. Fredo set his cup down gently. "We're good here, brother," he said to Miguel, his tone carrying none of the tension vibrating through the room. "Thanks for the coffee." Miguel nodded gratefully and retreated, but the damage was done. The air had shifted from uncomfortable to volatile. Danny stood. Slowly. The movement deliberate, theatrical. He picked up his espresso cup and walked toward Fredo's table, each step measured, each footfall a statement of dominance. His investors watched with a horrified fascination of people witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Danny stopped beside Fredo's chair, looking down like a king surveying a peasant. Up close, he could see the scars on Fredo's hands, the faded tattoos on his forearms, military insignia, dates, names of brothers who didn't make it home. "Those are interesting," Danny said, gesturing with his cup. "The tattoos. Very authentic." His smile was all teeth, no warmth. "What are they? Souvenirs? You get those fixing tires or fighting dogs?" The table went silent. Johnny's jaw clenched. Luke's hand tightened around his fork. Meacham's eyes went flat, dangerous. But Fredo didn't move. Didn't react. He simply looked up at Danny with the kind of calm that comes from facing down things far more dangerous than rich men with fragile egos. "They're reminders," Fredo said quietly, "of people worth remembering." It was the restraint that did it. The refusal to take the bait. The quiet dignity that made Danny look small despite his expensive suit and his billions in the bank. And Danny Johnson couldn't stand being made to feel small. "Reminders," he repeated, his voice dripping with mockery. "How touching. Very noble. Very." He never finished the sentence. In one smooth, contemptuous motion, Danny flicked his wrist. The espresso, still steaming, still hot enough to burn, arced through the air in a perfect, deliberate trajectory. It hit Fredo square in the face. The liquid splashed across his cheek, his beard, his leather vest. Dark drops scattered across the white tablecloth like accusatory fingerprints. The cup followed, shattering against the marble floor with a sound that echoed through the sudden, absolute silence. 4-3 heartbeats. Nobody moved. The restaurant had become a photograph. Danny, standing with his empty hand still extended. Fredo, coffee dripping from his face. The other bikers, frozen mid-motion between sitting and standing. Wealthy patrons with forks suspended halfway to mouths, eyes wide with shock. Then reality crashed back in. Johnny shot to his feet, chair scraping violently against marble. "You son of a..." Fredo's hand went up. Not aggressive. Just up. A simple gesture that stopped Johnny cold. The entire room watched as Fredo reached for a napkin. Slowly. Methodically. He dabbed at his face, his movements unhurried, almost meditative. Coffee stained the white cloth brown. When he was done, he folded it carefully and set it on the table. Then he looked up at Danny. His eyes weren't angry. They weren't even particularly upset. They held something far more unsettling: certainty. The absolute knowledge of how this story would end. "You'll regret that," Fredo said, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow filling the entire space, "before your coffee cools." Danny laughed. A sharp, brittle sound that didn't quite mask the first flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Is that a threat?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Did everyone hear that?" "He just threatened me." But Fredo wasn't looking at him anymore. He was looking at Johnny, who still stood with fists clenched, rage vibrating through every muscle. "Make the call," Fredo said quietly. Johnny hesitated for just a moment. Then he nodded, pulling out his phone as he headed toward the exit. Danny watched him go, confusion mixing with his contempt. The call. He turned back to his investors, forcing another laugh. What's he calling? His lawyer? His mommy? Nobody laughed with him this time. Because something had changed in the restaurant. A shift in pressure, like the air before a storm. The other bikers sat motionless, watching Danny with expressions that held no anger, no threat. Just patience. The kind of patience that comes from knowing the cavalry is already on its way. Outside, on the glass-enclosed balcony overlooking the city, Johnny Sins stood with his phone pressed to his ear. The morning fog was burning off, revealing San Francisco in sharp relief, bridges and buildings glinting like promises. Below, 42 floors down, the city moved through its Friday rhythm. Cars. Pedestrians. People with problems much smaller than what was about to unfold. "Yeah, it's me," Johnny said into the phone. His voice was steady, controlled. "Valentina Restaurant. Downtown. 42nd floor." A pause. Someone speaking on the other end. Fredo got coffee thrown in his face by some billionaire prick. Another pause. "Yeah, that kind." Johnny's jaw tightened as he listened. "How many can you get here?" He nodded slowly. "All of them." "Yeah." He asked for it. He ended the call. Stood there for a moment, looking out over the city that was about to learn a lesson it wouldn't forget. Then he walked back inside. The restaurant had tried to return to normal. Conversations resumed, quieter now, laced with nervous energy. Silverware clinked against plates. The classical music continued its oblivious loop. But nothing was normal. Danny had returned to his table, forcing confidence into his posture like ill-fitting armor. He gestured broadly as he spoke to his investors, his voice louder than necessary. "That's the problem with this city," he was saying.
Nos standards et ni mort.
Anyone can walk into anywhere, and we're supposed to just... He stopped mid-sentence as Johnny walked back through the door. The biker didn't look at Danny. Didn't acknowledge him at all. He simply returned to Frito's table and sat down, pulling his coffee cup closer with a calm that felt almost ceremonial. Danny leaned back, smirking. That was quick.
What do you do? Call your mommy.
He looked to his investors for validation, found only uncomfortable silence. Or maybe you called for a ride home.
Smart.
Probably best if you boys leave before. Danny.
Fredo S. voice cut through the noise without rising above a conversational tone.
Something about the way he said the name, familiar, personal, like he'd known it all along, made Danny's smirk falter. "You know who I am?" Danny asked, ego wounded by the casual use of his first name. "Of course." Fredo took a sip of his coffee, unbothered.
Danny P. Johnson. Primvest Capital.
Net worth somewhere north of $4 billion. Fired 400 people last quarter. Made the news. He set his cup down gently.
You're not anonymous as you think. The word landed like small cut. Precise. Intentional. Danny S. face flushed.
Then you know what I'm capable of. One phone call and I can have you. You asked for attention, Danny. Fredo's eyes met his, steady and unblinking.
Now you've got it.
The phrase hung in the air, cryptic and unsettling. Danny opened his mouth to respond, but then, a sound. Faint at first. Distant.
Like thunder rolling in from miles away.
Everyone in the restaurant froze, heads tilting slightly, trying to identify what they were hearing. It was rhythmic. Growing. A low rumble that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Engines. Not one. Not two. Dozens. The deep guttural growl of motorcycles, their collective voice rising like a wave building offshore. A waiter moved to the window, confusion etched across his face. "What is that?" Miguel joined him, pressing close to the glass. His eyes went wide. "Oh my God."
The rumble grew louder.
Closer. It wasn't just sound anymore, it was vibration, traveling up through the building's steel skeleton, rattling the expensive silverware, making the crystal chandeliers hum with sympathetic resonance. Danny stood, irritation mixing with a first cold finger of unease.
What the hell is going on?
Fredo didn't answer. He simply took another sip of his coffee, calm as Sunday morning. More people moved to the windows now. Patrons abandoning their meals, drawn by the sound that had gone from distant to immediate, from curious to undeniable.
Jésus Christ, Someone whispered.
How many are there? They're blocking the entire street. Danny pushed through the small crowd gathering at the glass, his expensive shoes clicking against marble. He looked down, and his breath caught. Below, stretching block after block, was a sea of chrome and leather. Motorcycles lined the street in perfect formation, rows upon rows of them, glinting in the morning sun like an army assembled for war. Riders stood beside their bikes, arms folded, faces hidden behind helmets and sunglasses. Silent. Waiting. The rumble of idling engines shook the building like a heartbeat, steady and inexorable. Danny's hand found the glass, steadying himself. That can't be. 143, Fredo said from behind him, his voice carrying across the hushed restaurant. That's how many brothers heard the call. Give or take a few still riding in. The billionaire turned, his face pale beneath his carefully maintained tan. Fredo stood now, his coffee finished, his leather vest still stained with expensive espresso. Luke and Meacham flanked him, silent as statues. The three of them looked at Danny not with anger, but with something far more terrifying. Certainty. You wanted to know who we called, Fredo said quietly. Now you know. Below, as if choreographed, The first row of motorcycles revved their engines in unison. The sound was deafening even 42 floors up, rattling the windows, making the marble floor vibrate beneath their feet. And Danny P. Johnson, billionaire, CEO, master of his universe, realized for the first time in his adult life that money couldn't buy his way out of what was coming next. The silence was worse than the engines. After that first synchronized rev, a declaration of presence that rattled teeth and shook glass, the motorcycles went quiet. Not off. Just waiting. Idling so low the sound became a collective purr, a barely audible threat that somehow felt louder than any roar. 143 bikers stood beside their machines, arms folded across leather vests, faces obscured behind sunglasses and weathered patience. They didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't need to. Their presence alone had turned downtown San Francisco into a stage, and everyone knew the performance wasn't over. On the street below, pedestrians stopped mid-stride. Some pulled out phones immediately, angles tilting up toward the restaurant, fingers already typing. Others just stared, trying to process the wall of chrome and muscle that had materialized like a biblical plague. Holy shit, are you seeing this? Someone call the cops. I'm already streaming, we're at 3,000 viewers. Within 90 seconds, the first police cruiser arrived, lights flashing but sirens silent. 2 officers stepped out, hands nowhere near their weapons, surveying the scene with the careful neutrality of people who understood they were outmatched. The senior officer, Thompson, 20 years on the force, approached the nearest biker slowly. The man didn't move, just watched him come. "We got a call about a disturbance," Thompson said, his tone more curious than confrontational. The biker gestured toward the restaurant 42 floors up. "No disturbance, officer. Just waiting for a friend. All of you. All of us." Thompson looked down the block. More bikes were still arriving, slotting into formation like pieces of a puzzle. "You're blocking traffic. We're parked legally. Haven't moved since we got here." The biker's voice was calm, factual. "Check if you want. We're not breaking any laws." And he was right. Every motorcycle sat in a legitimate parking space or along the curb where parking was permitted. They hadn't blocked intersections. Hadn't threatened anyone. Hadn't done anything except exist. Thompson's radio crackled. Dispatch asking for an update. He pressed the button, eyes still on the assembled riders. "They're not doing anything wrong," he said slowly, like he couldn't quite believe it himself. Just standing there. Inside the Valentina, the atmosphere had transformed from exclusive to claustrophobic. Danny stood frozen at the window, his reflection ghostly against the glass. Behind him, his investors had gone silent, their breakfast forgotten. Other patrons whispered urgently into phones, some calling lawyers, some calling press contacts, some just calling anyone who might explain what they were witnessing. Miguel brought fresh coffee to Frito's table, his hands steadier now. Something about the biker's arrival had shifted the power in the room so completely that even the staff felt it. "On the house," Miguel murmured, filling Frito's cup. Fredo nodded his thanks, adding cream with movements that felt deliberately unhurried. He took a sip, letting the warmth settle, then set the cup down with a gentle clink of porcelain on porcelain. That small sound somehow cut through all the whispered chaos. Danny turned from the window, his face a mask trying desperately to maintain composure. Sweat beaded at his hairline despite the air conditioning. His hands, usually so confident with their expansive gestures, hung awkwardly at his sides. "This is intimidation," he said, his voice pitched too high. "I'll have every one of you arrested for." "For what?" Fredo asked mildly. "Standing on a public street?" "For threatening me." "Has anyone threatened you, Danny?" Fredo's eyes were calm, almost gentle. "Has anyone said a single word to you besides me?" Danny opened his mouth. Closed it. The truth was a trap he couldn't escape. No one had threatened him. No one had even approached him. Below, phones continued to capture everything. The live stream counts were climbing. 10,000 viewers, 15,000, 20. Hashtags were already forming. #BikerWall, #Valentina Standoff, #SF Showdown. The court of public opinion was convening, and Danny didn't even know he was on trial yet. "They're here because you called them," Danny said, desperation creeping into his voice. "You." "I didn't call anyone." Fredo took another sip. "Johnny did. And he didn't call them here to hurt you." "Then what?" Danny's hands clenched into fists. "What do they want?" Fredo set his coffee down and stood slowly. He wasn't tall, maybe 5'10", but in that moment he seemed to fill the entire space. The room went quiet, everyone straining to hear what came next. He walked toward Danny, boots soft against marble, until only a table's width separated them. His vest still carried the coffee stain, evidence of the humiliation Danny had inflicted. When Fredo spoke, his voice was low enough that only Danny and those closest could hear. But somehow, everyone felt the weight of it. "They're not here to hurt you, Danny." He paused, letting the words settle like sediment. "They're here to teach you." Danny's laugh came out strangled. "Teach me?"
Teach me what?
Fredo's expression didn't change. That there are some things money can't buy. He glanced toward the window, toward the wall of silent riders below. "And some things it can't protect you from." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." Fredo turned back to his table. "The lesson starts when you're ready to learn." Outside, a new sound began, not engines but voices. The gathered bikers had started something that sounded almost like a chant, though the words were indistinct from this height. But the rhythm was clear.
Steady a heartbeat.
Patient as time itself. And Danny P. Johnson, still standing at the window with the whole city watching below, finally understood he wasn't in control anymore. He never had been. The internet doesn't forgive.
It doesn't forget.
And it moves faster than conscience. By the time Danny pulled his phone from his pocket with trembling hands, the damage had already metastasized beyond containment. Notifications flooded his screen, a cascade of alerts that kept coming, relentless as a digital avalanche. The main live stream had hit 300,000 viewers and climbing. But it wasn't just one stream anymore. It was dozens. Hundreds. Every angle, every perspective, every witness with a phone had become a broadcaster, and Danny P. Johnson was their main event. His phone buzzed. His PR manager, Stephanie, the woman he paid 6 figures to make problems disappear. "Turn it off." Her voice came through frantic, barely controlled.
Danny, turn off your phone right now.
Delete your socials. The internet is eating you alive. "What are you talking about? I'm the victim here." "You threw coffee in a veteran's face." She was shouting now, professionalism abandoned. "It's everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, the news, CNN just picked it up.
Fox is running it.
Even international outlets." Danny's hand went numb. The phone nearly slipped from his grip.
C'était impossible.
"It's been 10 minutes.
Welcome to the internet, Danny.
10 minutes is a lifetime." Papers rustled on her end. "I'm looking at your mentions right now. There are 200,000 tweets about you in the last 8 minutes. The hashtag is #Coffeegate, and it's #1 trending worldwide." The room tilted slightly. Danny reached for his chair, missing it on the first try. On his screen, he watched his digital execution in real time. Someone had found his Instagram, the photos he'd posted last month from his yacht in Monaco.
Crystal champagne flute.
Supermodels in bikinis. A caption that read, "Living my best life. #blessed, #no apologies." The comments beneath it had become a war zone. "This you throwing coffee at veterans? Blessed with being a garbage human, hope your yacht sinks." Another post, him celebrating the quarterly earnings, the same meeting where he bragged about cutting 400 jobs. Someone had screenshotted that conversation from a leaked email, posting it alongside footage of him throwing the coffee. Subject: Q3 results. 400 fewer salaries equals 18% shareholder increase. Sometimes you have to cut dead weight. The juxtaposition was devastating. Intentional cruelty documented in his own words, paired with video of him assaulting someone for the crime of existing in his space. More screenshots emerged like sharks smelling blood. His luxury car collection. His third home in Aspen. Articles about his contentious divorce where he'd fought to avoid paying child support. An old interview where he'd called minimum wage workers replaceable cogs. Every skeleton was being dragged from every closet, and the world was watching them dance. Then the narrative shifted. Someone, probably one of the bikers below, had started posting photos.
Not of the standoff.
Of the men themselves. Fredo in military dress blues, younger, standing with his unit. Caption, Fallujah, 2006. 2 tours. Purple Heart. Johnny Sins at a children's hospital, surrounded by kids with cancer, his leather vest replaced by a volunteer t-shirt. Oakland MC raises $200,000 annually for pediatric care. Luke at a funeral, standing honor guard, American flag folded in his massive hands. We bury brothers who came home but never really made it back. Meacham building houses with Habitat for Humanity, sweat-stained and smiling. The counter-narrative spread like wildfire, and suddenly the dangerous bikers were heroes, and the billionaire was a villain in expensive tailoring.
Danies phone lie up again.
His board chairman. He didn't answer. Another call. His lawyer. Ignored. Text from his biggest investor. We need to talk. Now. His stock portfolio app sent an alert. Primavest Capital down 7% in after-hours trading. 7%. In minutes. The news stations had moved past reporting to analyzing. Split screens showed the standoff from multiple angles, while talking heads debated in real time. Clear case of assault, these men served their country. Pattern of behavior from Johnson. Privilege and power unchecked. Someone had created a Wikipedia page for the incident already. It had citations. Sources. A timeline. The internet had built his courtroom, held his trial, and delivered its verdict before he'd even finished his breakfast. Danny's hands shook as he scrolled, unable to stop, watching his reputation disintegrate like paper in fire. Every refresh brought fresh horror. Every notification was another nail in a coffin he'd built himself. Marcus, one of his investors, stood slowly from the table. Danny, I think we should. Sit down, Danny snapped, but his voice cracked on the second word. Marcus didn't sit down. He picked up his briefcase, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward the elevator without another word. The other 2 investors exchanged glances and followed. Just like that, Danny was alone at his table, his empire crumbling in real time while perfect strangers 42 floors below stood as silent witnesses to his fall. His phone buzzed one more time. He looked at the screen. Felt his stomach drop. Claire, his wife. Not Danny's phone. Not even his name.
Just, what have you done?
3 words. No punctuation. The kind of message that carried more weight in what it didn't say than what it did. Danny looked up. Across the restaurant, Fredo met his eyes. The biker raised his coffee cup in a slight toast, his expression unreadable. Below, 300,000 people watched. And the internet kept counting. Danny's chair scraped against marble as he shot to his feet, face flushed, tie loosened from panic sweat. He needed air. He needed escape. He needed to be anywhere but here, trapped inside a glass cage with 1,000 eyes watching from below and a million more streaming online. He lunged toward the elevator. But the doors didn't open. A wall of phone cameras blocked his path. Waiters, investors, even the manager who'd kissed his ring an hour ago. Everyone was filming. Everyone was waiting. The kind of silence that doesn't ask permission, it demands answers. Fredo rose slowly from his seat. Not aggressive. Not loud. Just present. The kind of presence that makes emperors remember they're mortal. He didn't walk toward Danny. He didn't need to. His voice carried across the restaurant like smoke through still air, soft, but impossible to ignore. You humiliated a man who fought for the country that built your empire. Danny's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. His brain scrambled for the script he'd used 1,000 times before, the one where he controlled the room, where his money made him untouchable, where consequences were for other people. It was a joke, he stammered, voice cracking. I didn't mean.
Fredo S. Andros.
Not threatening. Just stopping time. Then laugh. 2 words. That's all it took. The room held its breath. Phones recorded. The live stream count climbed past 400,000. Somewhere in Silicon Valley, an algorithm flagged this moment as culturally significant. Somewhere in New York, a PR firm began drafting crisis statements they'd never get paid to finish. Danny stood frozen, lips trembling, eyes darting between Fredo and the cameras and the exit he couldn't reach. His empire, built on intimidation, maintained through fear, celebrated in Forbes, was collapsing in real time, and the only sound in the room was his own ragged breathing.
Fredo stepped closer.
Not into Danny's space. Just into his truth. You think power comes from a corner office? His voice was a scalpel, precise and cold. From firing people to pad your stock options? From throwing coffee because someone didn't bow? Danny's knees buckled slightly. He braced himself against the table. Real power, Fredo continued, is the restraint to let a man like you walk out of here with all your teeth. He paused, letting that sink in. Letting Danny, and the 500,000 people watching, understand exactly what mercy looked like.
We don't need to touch you to destroy you.
You did that yourself. Outside, the chant began.
Soft at first. Rhythmic. Like a heartbeat made of thunder.
Respect. 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 Danny's phone buzzed against the table, texts exploding in real time. Stock down 18%.
Board calling emergency meeting.
Advertisers pulling out. His hand shook as he tried to silence it, but the screen just kept lighting up, message after message, empire after empire crumbling in his palm. Fredo leaned in close enough for only Danny to hear. You've got one chance to save what's left. Then louder, for the cameras, for history. Apologize to every veteran today, or your empire burns tomorrow. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Danny looked at Fredo's face, calm, unwavering, the face of a man who'd already won before the fight even started. And for the first time in his life, Danny P. Johnson realized. He was the one begging. The chant rolled through the streets like distant thunder before a storm. Respect. 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 Not loud. Not violent. Just relentless. A heartbeat made of leather and chrome and something Danny had never understood, solidarity. He could feel it vibrating through the floor, crawling up his spine, wrapping around his throat like invisible hands. The same throat that had barked orders at boards, that had laughed at layoffs, that had sneered at men who'd bled for freedoms he'd only ever consumed. His phone lit up again. NASDAQ alert, DPJ Industries minus 23% in 14 minutes. His thumb hovered over the screen, frozen. He watched the number drop in real time. 24%. 26. Each percentage point was a mansion, a yacht, a legacy dissolving into digital smoke. A text from Marcus Chun, his oldest investor, emergency vote. You're out. Don't call. Another from the CFO, board's moving to remove you.
I'm sorry.
Then his assistant, sweet, loyal Jennifer who'd covered for him through scandals and affairs and firings, appeared in his peripheral vision. She set her tablet on the table with a quiet click, looked him dead in the eye, and walked toward the elevator without a word.
No explanation.
No drama. Just done. Danny's breath came short and shallow now. He tried to straighten his tie to summon that voice, the one that made shareholders fall in line, made senators return calls, made the world bend. But when he opened his mouth, what came out was a croak. You can't just. His voice cracked like ice under weight. Fredo hadn't moved. Hadn't spoken. Just stood there with the patience of a man who'd seen empires fall before and knew exactly how long it took. Danny's eyes darted around the room, investors avoiding his gaze, waiters filming, the manager pretending to check reservations. Even the sunlight streaming through the glass felt like a spotlight on a stage he never auditioned for. The chant outside grew softer, more deliberate. Respect. Respect. It wasn't a threat. It was a metronome. A countdown. A choice being measured in heartbeats. Danny's knees gave first. Not dramatically. Not like in movies. Just, gravity won. He sank slowly, his $1,000 slacks pressing against cold marble, his hands gripping the edge of the table to keep from collapsing entirely. The words started as a whisper. I'm sorry. Barely audible. Swallowed by shame. But the phones caught it. The mics caught it. The algorithm caught it and fed it to millions. Fredo tilted his head slightly. Waiting. Danny's voice cracked again, louder this time, wet with something he hadn't felt in decades, genuine remorse, or maybe just the terror of losing everything. I'm sorry. Louder now. I was wrong. His breath hitched. I disrespected men who deserve better. I disrespected people who gave more than I ever. He couldn't finish. His shoulders shook. The room stayed silent. Not mocking. Not celebrating. Just witnessing. Fredo stepped forward, slow and deliberate, until he stood directly in front of Danny's bowed head. He reached for the fresh cup of coffee the waiter had nervously placed on the table minutes ago, the one meant to replace what Danny had thrown. He lifted it carefully and set it down on the floor in front of Danny. Steam curled upward between them. Fredo's voice was quiet, but it carried like a blade through silk. Next time you raise a cup, raise it right. He turned, nodded to his brothers, and walked toward the elevator. The engines outside roared to life, not in anger, but in acknowledgement. Justice didn't need fists. It just needed witnesses. Fredo didn't say a word. He didn't need to. One glance, brief, deliberate, and every biker in that restaurant rose as one. Chairs slid back in perfect synchronization. Leather creaked. Boots hit marble with the rhythm of a military formation, leaving sacred ground.
No threats. No posturing.
No victory laps. Just men who'd made their point walking away before the world could twist it into something else. The elevator doors opened like a curtain on the final act, and they filed in, silent, dignified, untouchable. Danny remained on his knees, face buried in his hands, shoulders trembling. The investors pretended to check their phones. The manager stared at the floor. Even the live stream chat went quiet, as if the internet itself had run out of words. Outside, the bikers mounted their machines.
For a moment, one perfect, crystalline moment, there was nothing.
No engines. No voices.
Just the wind of the bay and the distant cry of Gull.
Then Fredo raised his fist.
And the city roared.
400 engines ignited in unison, a tidal wave of thunder that rolled through downtown San Francisco like an earthquake made of sound. Windows rattled. Car alarms shrieked. Pedestrians froze mid-step, phones raised. Recording the moment power decided to walk away instead of destroy. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. We were here. We could have done anything.
Oui, chose merci.
The formation moved as one, a river of chrome and exhaust flowing through the streets like something ancient and unstoppable. They didn't speed. Didn't weave. Just rode, steady and deliberate, the way men ride when they've already won. Back at the Valentina, chaos erupted the second the sound faded. Journalists burst through the doors. Cameras, microphones. Questions fired like artillery. Danny scrambled to his feet, tie askew, face blotchy and red, trying to shield himself with his hands as flashes exploded around him. Mr. Johnson.
Do you stand by your action?
Was this a hate crime?
Will you resign?
He pushed through them, stumbling, mumbling incoherent half-answers that would be dissected and memed within the hour. Then the police arrived. 3 patrol cars, lights spinning, officers stepping out with confused expressions. The sergeant scanned the scene, broken coffee cup, shattered CEO, viral infamy, and spoke into his radio. Dispatch, we're at the Valentina. No signs of assault. No property damage.
No.
He paused, listening to something in his earpiece, then sighed. They didn't break a single law. One of the younger officers muttered, "How do you destroy a man without touching him?" The sergeant just shook his head. "You make him face himself."
Miles away, the convoy split at the bay.
Some headed east toward Oakland. others south toward the peninsula. But Fredo rode west, alone, toward the Golden Gate.
The sun on low and fat over the Pacific, painting the bridge in shades of copper and fire.
The city glowed behind him, sharp towers catching the light, reflecting a world that had just watched arrogance kneel before dignity. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He ignored it for a mile. 2. 3. Finally, at a scenic overlook where tourists gathered to photograph the bridge, he pulled over.
Killed the engine.
Pulled out his phone.
A notification lit up the screen.
Breaking news. Billionaire CEO Danny P. Johnson pledges $10 million to veterans charities. Fredo stared at the headline for a long moment. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket, kicked the engine to life, and rode into the sunset, not as a conqueror, but as a man who understood something most people spend their whole lives chasing. Sometimes the greatest victory is teaching someone else how to lose with grace. 1 year later. The diner sat just off Highway 1, the kind of place where truckers and bikers and people running from something all ended up eventually.
Craqué de vinyle boot.
Coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the Reagan administration.
A jukebox in the corner playing Credence low and steady.
Fredo and his brothers gathered in their usual spot, back corner, facing the door, old habits from old lives. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. The kind of silence that comes from men who've ridden together long enough to speak in nods and half-grins. Johnny Sins was halfway through a story about a blown tire in Bakersfield when the bell above the door chimed. A courier stepped in, young kid, barely 20, wearing a uniform 2 sizes too big. He scanned the room nervously until his eyes landed on Fredo. Delivery for
Fredo Castellano.
The table went quiet. Fredo raised an eyebrow. Don't use my government name in public, kid. The courier's hand shook slightly as he held out a thick envelope, cream-colored paper, edges embossed, sealed with gold wax that caught the fluorescent light like a promise or a confession. No return address. Just a single initial pressed into the seal, D. Fredo took it slowly, turned it over in his scarred hands. The weight of it felt wrong, too formal, too heavy for junk mail, too personal for a legal threat. He broke the seal. Inside, 3 sheets of paper, handwritten in careful script. Not typed. Not printed. Written, the kind of effort that takes time, that demands you sit with your shame long enough to spell it out letter by letter. The first page was simple. Fredo. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I owe you the truth written in my own hand, not through lawyers or publicists or the machinery I used to hide behind. You were right. Power isn't wealth. It's knowing when to be humble. Fredo's eyes scanned down, an apology that stretched across paragraphs, raw and unpolished, the kind of honesty that only comes after everything else has been stripped away. The second page was a bank statement. A wire transfer confirmation. $10 million, Veterans Relief Fund. And a handwritten note beneath it. This doesn't erase what I did. But maybe it helps someone who deserves better than I gave them. The third page was shortest. Thank you for not making me a villain. You made me a student. Danny. Fredo folded the letter slowly, the paper crinkling in the diner's stale air. He slipped it into the inner pocket of his vest, right over his heart, where he kept the things that mattered. Johnny leaned in. What's it say? Fredo didn't answer right away. He just reached for his coffee mug, the same chipped ceramic cup the waitress refilled every visit, and lifted it slightly. The others followed. 4 mugs rose in the air, steam curling between them like incense. No words. No toast. Just the quiet acknowledgement of men who'd seen the world break someone and watched them choose to rebuild. Fredo took a slow sip, set the mug down gently, and finally spoke, not to his brothers, but to the universe, to the algorithm, to anyone still listening. Some men throw coffee. Others hold the cup steady. Outside, the sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows across the asphalt. Engines sat silent in the lot. Inside, the jukebox switched tracks. And somewhere in San Francisco, in a smaller office with fewer windows, a man who'd once ruled an empire sat at his desk and smiled, not with arrogance, but with something quieter. Something earned. Respect can't be bought, only earned. And the price? Humility, honesty, and the courage to rebuild after you've burned everything down. The legend of the coffee reversal lived on, not as a viral moment, but as a parable. A reminder that true power doesn't roar. It whispers. And sometimes the loudest statement you can make is walking away. If you believe that true strength comes from restraint, not revenge, and that respect is earned through dignity, not dominance, like and share this story. Subscribe now for more stories like this, where justice doesn't need violence and power bows to honor. Also check out the 2 videos showing on the screen right now, specially crafted for you, because if watching arrogance meet humility moved you, these stories will shake you to your core.